Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Chapter 5. I am nothing without you. God. Natural theology. I was once asked what my favorite topic in philosophy is. It took me a second to think through the various topics, but as soon as I thought of it, I knew it. God. This was a surprising answer to the person who asked the question, because God is always thought of as a strictly religious entity. But philosophy can also give us a lot of information about God, and no subject is more beautiful. We call this natural theology, because we are finding out what we can about God using only our natural resources. It is very difficult and very abstract because when we think about God, we are thinking about someone whom we cannot fully grasp. Augustine once said, "If you understand it, it is not God." In other words, if you have some accurate, neat little picture in your mind of God, then that picture is wrong. This is why I agree with what most atheists say. Most of the things that they reject about God, I reject too. The type of God that they portray is not the God that philosophy and Catholicism reveals to us. We've already looked at how the problem of evil is a straw man, and most other arguments against God fall into the same category. God loves science. Perhaps one of the most common arguments against God, which isn't even really an argument, is the appeal to science. But science cannot tell us anything about whether or not God exists, because science deals only with ideas about the physical universe that can be tested by experiment. There is no experiment you can perform to determine whether or not there is a God. By almost every definition of God, even the bad ones, God is not a physical thing that is part of the universe. So, science cannot determine if God exists. This appeal to science is more of a distraction than a real argument. And a distraction like this is another informal fallacy called a red herring. Since we're on the topic, it is worth mentioning how science is sometimes used as an argument against some forms of religion, because there are some religions that officially teach things that contradict current mainstream science. And so, science is said to disprove those religions. However, there are no conclusions in mainstream science that contradict the official teaching of the Catholic Church. The Church has never officially taught that the earth does not move. The Church has always been open to the possibility of evolution. The Church has always been open to the Big Bang. As a matter of fact, it was a Catholic priest who invented the Big Bang theory, Father George Lemaitre. Most atheists assume that all Christian denominations interpret the Bible in a 21st century literal sense. This is another straw man. The fact is that no religion is more conducive to science than Roman Catholicism. And it was Roman Catholicism that gave birth to modern science. Necessary existence. Let's return to the topic of God, and we are going to approach this topic through metaphysics. As we saw back in Chapter 3, all of the things with which we interact on a daily basis exist contingently. In other words, they don't have to exist. However, since all of those things exist contingently, they did not cause themselves. But their causes must also have had some cause, and so on and so forth. So we have a chain of contingent things causing more contingent things. How far back this chain goes, philosophy cannot tell us. Science tells us that this goes back at least to the Big Bang, but the laws of science break down at that point, so we don't know if it goes back further than that or not. One way or another, there is a chain of contingent causes. It is important to realize that this entire chain of contingent causes is also contingent. The chain of causes does not contain the reason for its own existence, no matter how many causes are in the chain. So even this chain of causes did not have to exist. Therefore, there must be something that caused the chain of causes and the whole universe itself. Since this thing is able to give existence to everything, existence must be its essence. So behind everything else that exists, there is this one thing, the very essence of existingness. This is not just another thing in the universe, it is the very act of being itself. And we call this thing God. After all, the name that God revealed to Moses was, I am. God did not say, I am this thing or that thing, but simply, I am. If someone at this point asks, well, who created God? We can be sure that this person doesn't understand what or who we are talking about. Since it is the very nature of God to exist, he does not need a cause. He exists through himself. He must exist because he is necessary existence. I realize that this might not sound like a very exciting God, and it might not sound like the God you hear about in church or Sunday school or at your grandma's house, but remember, A, that we are just getting started, and B, we are doing technical philosophy. Hang in there, because this understanding of God is the real theory of everything, because it explains everything, and no topic could be more important to know and think about. Since God is the source of everything that exists and every perfection, everything that exists participates in the divine nature to some degree. Every object with which you have ever come in contact is a little window to God. You and this book and the sun are all dependent on God for existence and essence. Everything is intrinsically interesting because everything shows us about some perfection that can only be found in God's being. If you are bored, finding something to do won't solve the problem. You need a change in philosophy. Non-spatial and atemporal. Let us continue. Since the essence of this thing is existingness, then it cannot change. It cannot lose anything of its essence, because then it would not exist, and it would not be. But it must be, because it is the essence of existence. Since there is no change in this thing, then it does not exist in time. In other words, atemporal. The time that we experience is part of our universe, and it results from things coming into and out of existence, but necessary existence is not part of our universe. Neither is existingness something that only lives in a certain location or takes up space. It is non-spatial. All of space exists and receives its existence from existingness. So necessary existence is non-spatial and atemporal. I realize that this is not easy to imagine something that has an existence outside of space and time. It is more than not easy, it is impossible. But this is where the evidence and the logic have brought us. God is personal. Right now, all we have is this act of existing itself. And since the essence of this thing is simply to exist, it did not have to create, but it did create. So this thing, God, must have a will. God must have decided to create a universe. Therefore, this necessary being is personal. He has a mind and a will because he decided to make a universe, and he did. Therefore, everything in the universe receives existence from existingness. All of the action is on God's side. There is nothing passive in God. He does not receive any information. He himself is the source of every essence, and everything that exists only participates in what it receives from God. Just as fullness of truth, emet, is the beginning, middle, and end, so God himself is the beginner, sustainer, and goal of all creation. God himself is truth itself. Just as Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. More about the word emet. The letters in the Hebrew alphabet double as symbols for the numbers. So the first letter in the alphabet, which is also the first letter of the word emet, represents the number 1. In this vehemently monotheistic culture of the Jews, the number 1 represents God. When that first letter, which represents God, is removed from the word emet, the resulting word is met, which means death. If we take God away from truth, we get death. If we leave God in, we get fullness of truth. This understanding of God as the act of existing itself opens the possibility for a real, understandable, and good universe, which is necessary for truth. Since God is the source of your existence, you are nothing without him, and I mean that as literally as possible. Hence the title of this chapter. God and contradictions. I want to take you through one more exercise before moving on to the next chapter. People sometimes ask if God can create a rock so big that even he can't lift it. The answer to this question comes easily enough if we keep in mind the basic principle of non-contradiction. Imagine that there is a rock so big that God cannot lift it. If that is the case, then God is not all-powerful because there is something he cannot do. But God is all-powerful. And now we have a contradiction. God is all-powerful and God is not all-powerful. Therefore, this situation is a contradictory situation and is not possible. As a matter of fact, since it involves a contradiction, it is not a situation at all. It is a non-situation. It is a state of being that is not possible for any being in any universe under any circumstances because they do not have the potential for being. Therefore, God cannot create a rock so big that he cannot lift it. Aha! So there is something else that God cannot do. Nope. God can do all things, but contradictions are not things. Contradictions are non-things. They do not even have the capacity to exist in the first place. This does not put any limit on God. It only helps us to understand what is possible and what is absolutely impossible based on the very nature of being itself. Making God in our image. This image we have created of God must be guarded from anthropomorphism. It is all too tempting to think of God in our own image, but that would lead to a straw man. For example, if you think of God as a powerful human being who needs to be instructed by us and who throws emotional temper tantrums, then God's omnipotence and unchangingness are contradicted. But that image of God is a straw man, however popular it may be. In the spiritual life, it is necessary to use images and analogies to help us understand the heart of God. But in philosophy, we cannot stress enough the importance of being strict in our thinking and naming of God. We simply cannot wrap our minds around God. We are limited, finite creatures talking about the limitless, infinite Creator. That does not mean that we cannot make true statements about Him, but we have to understand the limits of our thoughts. Just as modern physicists have equations that accurately describe some very strange behavior of nature that they cannot really understand, so we have accurate philosophical statements about a being we cannot fully grasp. This is the best part of philosophy, the part where we reach the limit of our abilities and stand in awe at the source of all things. I once went on a missions trip to a country in Central Asia during the summer. At the end of our time there, we went to an empty ski resort for time to pray and mentally process our trip. One day, some of us pointed to a snow-capped peak and said, "Let's go." It took a long time, but we eventually made it to the top, and we found that we were only on the edge of an entire rugged mountain range with snow-capped mountain after snow-capped mountain, going beyond what we could see. It is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. We simply did not have the ability to go any further. We could not enter in to the beauty of that place. We could only gaze in complete wonder at the beauty before us. So is the mind before the beautiful mystery of God.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.